Welcome, John. Really good to have you here.
It's nice to be here. It is.
So let's start with your choices. Let's start with the Randall Jarrell poem. Why did you choose it?
You need to give me questions, or else I won't know you're asking me anything. I'll just nod. I actually had a phase of really loving his work many years ago, and then stop. Every now and again you feel as though you've fed from that particular branch of the tree, as it were, and you move on. And I realised actually that the best work, I hadn't really gotten into the best work, which is the later work. Jarrell's a really interesting character because he is judged almost entirely by his earlier work, especially the war poems that he wrote while serving as well. A very odd job that he had. I mean, go into that if you wanted, but he had an odd job. He never saw a theatre of war as such. He was training the pilots to use this kind of stellar navigation systems. But he did see a lot of the stories that happened to people. And he wrote this terrifying, horrible war poem, and the death of the bold turret gunner. 5 lines, and I'm glad it didn't go on. Because by 5 lines I was destroyed. But he was known for this poem. This poem was always anthologized, and then one tended to look at the earlier poems most. And then in the last few years I've been going back to, and I've read some of them, I've read all of the later poems and appreciated some of them, but now I'm really deeply into the later poems, and that's one of the later poems, and I really want that. Jarrell often will do things where he'll just go on and on. He doesn't know when to stop. He gets into this kind of he thinks he's Robert Frost doing a big long narrative poem. He's not. He's just watching a woman go shopping. But he doesn't know when to stop. But when he gets control of things and manages this extraordinary simplicity, and he says something for me very profound about the condition of the quotidian existence, which I believe that quotidian existence is the one thing that we can actively say works against war. The more we praise and enjoy and understand the complexity of quotidian existence, the less inclined I think our young people will be persuaded to go to war. That's probably wishful thinking. It's a nice idea. Yeah, but this beautiful poem is about that wonderful, the immediacy of experience, which of course I chose partly because of the occasion and the group of people I was expecting to meet.
And the Stevens poem, wonderful old Stevens poem.
Yeah, that old Stevens poem. It still surprises us after all these years. I think I read the first when I was in my mid-teens. And I actually I don't think I understood it at all. I thought he was saying one must have a mind of winter. I think, oh good, I'm ahead of the pack here. Being a Scotsman and all. But he was of course saying, and that long, the sentence goes on and then suddenly you get the shift. And one must have, and then not to. But at the end, everyone dwelt endlessly on the nothing that is not there and nothing that is, but also nothing himself. And I just thought about that all the time. And when we were living in Cambridge, I got deeply into Jean-Paul Sartre, I'm afraid, for a long time. And my partner, girlfriend, whatever you want to say, was a Buddhist, in fact, and she understood the nothing perfectly well. She used to say to me, you don't have to read Le Néant et l'Être to understand that. You should just sit for a while. Because I was perverse and Scottish, so she was English and I was Scottish, so I had to do the hard way. But that nothing question is one that I find infinitely rewarding. Hard to write about. I'm always doing it without intending to. And I read a lot of the Japanese swordsman's classics, as it were, and I'm particularly interested in Tsunotomo, who is now quite well known, I think. You've only seen the film Ghost Dog. Yeah? Well, those little, where a forest was coats these lines, they're all from Sunodoma, the Hagakure book. And the master swordsmen of Japan were actually philosophically very profound thinkers. They really were. I mean, it must have been extraordinary to be in their presence. And of course, it was what one feels about the warrior is the great warrior is the one who brings peace, because he understands or she understands that how awful and destructive the fight is. But to have that power, the confidence, the more than confidence, it's something else, that simply by being there you can actually cause peace to break out. Because, you know, I guess it's probably similar to my father in his pubs. The tough, hard man, you know, he was in fact one of these men, and people didn't fight around him because he might get up and hit them, and they didn't want that to happen. You know? So, you know, in a way, it was that's a kind of bastardized version of what the swordsman, the presence of these swordsmen.
And with the Stephen, I mean, I am really struck by his influence on you. I mean, you know, even your title sometimes are a little bit Stevens-like. I was thinking of your title, Mother as Script and Ideal. Could be a Stevens title, couldn't it? Yeah. There's also this sense of a substitute for religion. The gorgeousness of language is quite like Stephen. And even the listening in that poem, listening comes back again and again in your poems.
Absolutely, listening's essential. Yeah. Paying attention, attentiveness. In my last novel, I don't think I've noticed this. I'm not saying I've noticed it visibly. I took Wallace Stevens's supposed life philosophy and had one of my characters adopt it. And it's called the as-if philosophy. And Stevens adopted it during his middle years, during the really dark time of when America entered the war, etc. And the basis of the as-if philosophy was you had to behave as if things were fine. Not that's a bit simple. But, for example, if there were leaders leading the country, then you had to imagine that they were competent to do so. It's a bit harder these days, isn't it? But this was it, you know. You behaved as if. So that all of the old moral values which were supported by religion in his, well, would have been in his youth, for example, and for many Americans still was supported in some way by religion, they were simply, you behaved as if they had some meaning even without a God. Because I never thought that, because I was brought up in the Catholic Church, I never saw the need for a God. I just remember being 12 and thinking, why did he even invent this character? It just seems superfluous to requirements. And then they had 3 of them. It was quite astonishing. Catholics are very greedy. You know, we don't have just one God, we have 3, and the Virgin Mary, which is far more interesting than the other 3. So you had all these people and saints all over the place. And I thought, I don't really need any of these characters. You know, and well, that's colourful. It was made Sundays. While you're trying not to faint from hunger in the church, because we weren't allowed to eat before communion. So the last food you had, you were allowed to have a little bit of water that morning, but the last food you had was the night before. I'm a big lad, and I like my food. And I would be doing various exercises, mental exercises, to stop myself from fainting. And we were cold and we were hungry in the church. So I look at the Virgin Mary and kind of focus on her foot crushing the snake. I think, why is she doing that to that poor snake? Obviously, I got everything backwards in Catholicism. I got it all backwards. But I didn't really need the divine, that divine stuff, as it were.
So that takes you to you and your childhood. Like, in one of the poems from Black Cat Bone, I think it's called Death Room Blues, it has this line, I'm half convinced my childhood never happened. And I thought, let's start with your childhood. I wonder whether you were born in Dunfermline and you moved to Corby, didn't you, later on?
Yeah.
Perhaps say a bit about your childhood. You know, of course, all the way through your work, your mother, your father, very haunting presences. You know, a lie about my father is, very much focusing on him. And I just thought you might introduce them to us and your childhood.
Yeah, well, my father was... I mean, I had to wait until I was about 40 to write the book about him and to try and cure myself of my anger and hatred I'd felt towards him when I was younger. But even since writing that book, I've gone a lot further in understanding the poor man's life. It was, I mean, I understood it in some kind of abstract way. But this is a man who was actually very intelligent, a passionate man, who was working as a builder's labourer to begin with, and then later on he got the job in the steel mill. He was married to a woman who was very pious, and in the old sense of the Catholic sense of the word, who took about almost any man, and I'm living in a Presbyterian country, which just to tap it off. So any manifestation of joy or joie de vivre or anything like that, let's put it this way, the word jouissance is not Scottish of origin. And this poor man was full of it. He really was. But it went into alcohol, gambling, and eruptions of violence, which were terrifying. And I remember seeing, he didn't have to do it very often. I didn't control him. I'm not saying he deliberately had a strategy. He just now and again he would erupt, and everyone would be terrified. He would smash furniture, he'd hit people, whatever. So when he went to his pub, the men there were afraid of him too, until eventually he got weaker, and he had a heart attack, first heart attack. He'd had 4 heart attacks before it killed him, but the first heart attack, I remember a young man walking up to me, my generation, and saying, "You keep an eye on Tommy now, because, you know, he's a mark now." And I suddenly thought, oh my God, you know, my father, the big tough guy, of course, he didn't last forever. And you can be a hard man to a certain point, and then everybody's looking at you and thinking, soft, something soft there. And everybody wants to be the first one to go up. And so I was keeping an eye on him. I remember once getting in between him and this other guy when this fight was breaking out, and he just did that and threw me way out of the way. And it was almost like Romeo getting in Mercutio's way in the sword fight. He threw me aside, and afterwards he said, "Don't you ever do that again, I'll kill you." You know, this. And so, you know, he had that going. But then the other side of him was invisible. He didn't get any chance to manifest it, except he would get drunk and then he would sit next to this, it was called a radiogram in those days. The radiogram, with a speaker in each hand and a little turntable in the middle. And he would play Mario Lanza singing Italian opera and sob and weep. You know, because nobody thought to say to him, you know, "Can we help you in any way?" He just thought, look at him, what a pathetic figure. And he'd gone from being big tough guy to, you know, self-pity. That's what I was seeing. So as I've gotten older and I just passed the age he was when he died, I felt as though each month almost recently, but certainly in the last few years, I've understood a little bit more about the pressure that was inside him, and he had nothing, no way of expressing it in any kind of creative. Or he went to work. I worked in the same mill. It was terrible, the noise, the heat, etc. And all this meant I could get out. And I did quite quickly. But those men were trapped there until they were laid off, and then there were nobodies. They were just dregs, you know. So I understand a lot more about him now, and I feel much more strong. I tried to put it in the book because I thought it was important to acknowledge that I failed also in looking at him. You know, people say, "Oh, well, you were just a child." No, that's not any excuses. I could have stopped and thought, this is my father, why is he suffering so much? But instead we just battled each other all the time. And I enjoyed it. I remember the time when he thought he'd caught me taking cannabis. And I came back to the house, and he sat me down and he said, "You can't fool me, you know. I'm not stupid. I know what you and Gary have been doing." And I said, "Well, what do you know?" And he said, "Well, I know you're smoking weed, or Mary Jane," or whatever he said. One of the words that we used in those days. Marijuana, reefer, you know. And I said, "God, I've been doing that for 2 years, Dad. I'm on acid now." But as funny as that is, you should have seen his face. Just dropped. He thought, "Oh my God, my son's a drug addict." And that was it. I'd rather end up in a lunatic asylum or on the street, and with a needle in my arm. I didn't do the second one. I didn't do the first one. But and I suddenly I look back now and I suddenly realised, my God, they cared as much. He didn't know how to help or do anything, but he cared as much that his son didn't end up like that as I do about my sons.
Yeah, of course.
So I feel much more inclined to see his point of view a little more now.
And your mother, she died younger, didn't she?
She was 47 when she died. And she died in a ridiculous manner in several ways. First, because she had the standard operation which would have removed her. With a hysterectomy in the old days, it would have removed the womb and the ovaries. It was a standard procedure to do that. And it turns out, I think that the surgeon was in a hurry, or she was just too poor to bother with all that about it. So they only removed the womb and left the ovaries in. And she had ovarian cancer. I mean, it's second guessing, of course, but that's what she died of. I always used to say she died of disappointment, because all her life she was hoping that something good would happen. She married this man who was in the RAF, and he was an imposing kind of figure, and then she made him leave the RAF, which is the only structure he had. And when he was in City Street, he was just a complete, he was a wild card. Then she had me, and the teachers at the school kind of line up to say how brilliant I was. I was in a small school. I was slightly more smart than the other kids in Cowdenbeath, junior school. Only about 20 others. But they all, your son is really, And so she got really excited about this, and and of course then I went to the dogs and took drugs and all. So she had that, and my sister got pregnant when she was 17, and all these things, all the things that you think are waiting for you if you live in poor working class world, happened to her, and then to my sister actually as well. And so she saw some of this already before she died, and when she was ill and dying, she looked at me, her golden boy, and my father was very resentful about that. He used to say, "Your mother thinks the sun shines." Well, anyway, we know where. But she would look at me. I was looking after her. I was working in the factory and looking after her, and then I gave up the factory so I could concentrate on looking after her. And one day she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you got that job on the TV." What job? And she'd been given morphine by this time, and she'd seen Bamber Gascon. Does anyone remember Bamber? Bamber Gascon. Do I look like Bamber Gascon? That's a lot of morphine. But she saw this guy doing the program on the Christians, and she was doubly pleased, because I'd got a career on television, and I'd gone back to the church. So she was delighted. And of course later on she came out of that mist and realised that she'd made a mistake, and she was painfully embarrassed by it. I said, no, I think it's it's fun. But what she was looking at was her son, who wasn't being the lawyer or the doctor or saving people from disease somewhere. I was just working in the factory looking after her, and she thought that was the end of my life. So.
And then there's that one of the, I think Blue in Still Life with Feeding Snake. Your mother comes back very much in that, doesn't it? And your grandmother. He says, "My mother's certain I would die like the one before."
Oh yeah, well she lost one before me, and then she lost one after me, child. That was not uncommon in working class families. In fact, she got off lightly. Several people had a lot more. My father, I think the thing about the one before me was my father used to use this as a weapon, because he when I was very small, he said to me, you had a sister. She was born before you, but she died. And I said, yeah, no, my mum told me. And he said, I wish it had been you that died and she had lived. I guess she knew that he was saying things like this, but she couldn't protect. She protected us in various ways, but she couldn't protect us against the worst, because then she would have been in the line of fire, and also we would get worse for making her get involved. But she used to do things like she'd wake me up and say, "Go out the bedroom window, and go and sit in the yard or in the woods or something till later, and I'll give you a shout to come in." Because my father was coming home with his cronies, and he used to get me up out of bed, and I'd be 5 or 6, and he'd have me serve them whiskey in the in the kitchen. He'd sit around the kitchen table and I'd serve them whiskey in little glasses. And he would ask me questions like, what's the capital of Bolivia? Or, what's the square root of so-and-so? He said, see? Brilliant. This is my son. He's got my brain. And he wanted people to say, this guy's smart, and therefore he must be smart. So she put me out the window so I could escape all of this. I don't know how she covered up the fact that I wasn't in my bed.
And then how from there did writing come into your life? Because it's not like you come from a literary...
No.
I remember in the lie about my father, one of the things you were shocked about people wearing short sleeves. How unusual that suddenly seemed with shirt sleeves, with short sleeves.
So Italian then.
Yeah, you don't. So you don't come from a literary culture. How did writing enter your life?
When I really wanted to be. At first, I wanted to be a musician. And then I wanted to be a painter or something like that. And I wanted something physical. And I had a teacher, Mr. Norman Edmonds, who I still remember very clearly now. And he was actually superannuated for the school. He was about 70 when I went to that school. But he taught me to play piano. And he would lend me books. We had no books in the house, in the Bible, which I read and enjoyed reading. But... he would lend me books, and I remember sitting with him after my piano class, which was Saturday mornings, and he would read me poems. He'd say, "Do you like this one? Listen to this." And they would be very old-fashioned poems that I probably wouldn't appreciate for a long time later, and I've now come back to and realised how fine they are. But he'd read me A.E. Houseman. A.E. Houseman is completely away from the 13-year-old boy. Although 13-year-old boys seem to appear a lot in it, for different reasons.
Different reasons.
But he would read me Houseman, and he would read me all the English poets, and then I was, and of course one heard something there, but you see that was over the other side of that hedge. That was Rupert Brooke country. I always think of it as. I remember being made to stand in the school assembly and stand up and say, "If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England." And I'm thinking, what am I doing here? I'm a Scottish working class pacifist. Why am I saying this kind of poetry? But then there was something about the rhythm and the musicality and sometimes the imagery. But then he introduced me to things like William Blake and Shelley and Keats. He was smart enough not to belabour me with Wordsworth, because the school text was the O-level text became Wordsworth, and I was taught Wordsworth by a nun. How to kill your interest in Wordsworth. She somehow made Wordsworth seem religious in the I don't know if you've ever had it. I don't know if people who are not Catholics get this. The Catholic Douay Bible is very heavily annotated. So all the way through, everything's explained in this sidebar. So, for example, I remember when I was given my free Bible. Every child in the Catholic school got a free Bible. The Pope bought them for us.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's very nice of him. It had a lot of money. And I remember opening it up and, wow! And I started reading the Song of Songs. Call it what you will. And I'm saying, this is a bit racy to the teacher. And she said, "I'll trust you." to go straight to that. And then she said, "It doesn't mean what you think it means, you dirty little boy." And it was all explained in the middle. This was symbolic of God's love for his church. So when Solomon talks about black and beautiful and and all these nuzzlings and things like that, it was actually the church being nuzzled by God, which is a horrible image. But she swore this is what it all meant, and that God had intended to mean that. And it was a test of our faith to make sure that we saw it that way and not to see it the other way. And I thought, well, maybe I should start going to porn movies and see what happens. Deepen my religious belief.
Well, that follows, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But she also somehow made Wordsworth, because we're talking about the 60s, remember? Wordsworth still had that little taint of deism or something about him. He wasn't, that he somehow thought that maybe nature was God instead of the real God. Catholics are very big on saying nature is not such a big deal. So she was always telling us, this doesn't mean that we're worshipping nature, you understand. I think, sounds like it. What's wrong with it if it is? It beats the hell out of talking to this old man, this leech gatherer, and making you into some kind of symbol of working class life. Which word it was, I didn't know as far as I can understand. So obviously one comes later to Wordsworth. But and that's what happens. A lot of people get taught a certain poet in school. It's the one poet they won't like. And they'll like all those other poets instead.
Indeed.
But I stumbled across people like Marianne Moore and people like that, and then started thinking, I'd love to do this. I wonder if you can do this. I wonder if people like me would love to do this. I actually thought it was actually not a vocation, but a job. I thought I was going to apply for some, poet wanted. 2 words you never see together. Poet wanted. And that's a crime thing, for embezzlement. So obviously nobody offered me a job as a poet, but I decided I could do it on my own. And I was very lucky because I was just old enough or poor enough or something enough to avoid the generation of people who went into workshops constantly and spent their whole life doing workshops. Because I still want, I don't teach poetry at the university where I teach prose, and we do workshops which I try and deter people from getting too involved with. But there's that kind of writing by committee which had started to happen just about the same time as I started finally to publish, because I was rejected a lot to begin with. And I thought, it seems like an awfully communal venture, this poetry business. And then they had the poetry of the new generation, which the astute among you will know as PONG. That was the original acronym, Poetry of the New Generation. And then they changed it to New Generation Poets. And I arrived from the East End of London, where I'd been in a business meeting, I think wearing a 2-piece King Edward check suit, and carrying my little leather bag. I'd just been in a meeting with an insurance company that I was working for. I was working in the computer business. And I remember meeting all these people who, as they sort of got to know me a little bit, edged away. And I kept finding myself standing in little spots where... I remember once I went to see Robert Crawford read, and I went to the South Bank Centre, and I sat down at the end of this, towards the end of this row, where, next person, and the 2 really hip young people who were there just moved two chairs away from me, because I wasn't part of the deal. I wasn't one of the guys, which is fun. I like that. I used to sit in my office at the computer, offices, and write poems instead of code or whatever.
And going on a bit more about your life. We'll come to the work a bit more. But I was remembering reading a lie about my father, really with a kind of amazement. In one of your poems, you talk about the going back and saying many of the things you missed the first time, and reading in that poem many of the things that you must have missed the first time. But one of the things that's really stayed with me, and I tried to talk to you about this once when I met you at a reading, babbling it out as you do, and you sort of looking at me vaguely sort of nonplussed. You talk about this experience you had in rehab, where you were looking at some tulips, I think, the light and some tulips. I wonder whether you could say something about that experience, because it really struck me, that experience, and how you describe it. It seems like a vision experience to me, but also what led you to that experience.
No, it's actually, in many ways, I tried to write that in a way that was admitting all the cliche elements of it. For it would be a vase of tulips in a day room of a place where they kept people like me when I was unruly, and but the thing was, I'd had these experiences a lot of being aware of I call it the isness. You can call it quiddiditas or whatever you want to call it, isness, whatever terminology people want to use. but being aware of the thing not as object but as subject, to feel that other as an existence in the world, the way one feels oneself being an existence in the world, not as other. There's no language, of course. That's what Buddhism is all about, isn't it? Having no language to say these things. But you know, I've had these experiences and they've been overwhelming. So I had no discipline. And then, you know, it's really important to have if you end up getting into a visionary state, you need some kind of discipline to hoik you out of it or control the situation, that you'll end up drowning in it. And I remember that was how I lost my mind. I wasn't taking too much LSD. That was the official part of it. I remember walking into a lecture room when I was a student, and there were all of these chairs. I'd gone into the wrong room, actually. I'd gone to the room next to where I should have been. So there's all these empty chairs, just rows of empty chairs. And I just couldn't take it. I mean, I couldn't reorganize this vision. These chairs were so beautifully, overwhelmingly, uniquely there that I could remember the next 4 or 5 hours. My girlfriend found me sitting in Cross Keys 4 or 5 hours later, and I had no idea what I'd been doing in between. And this vision of the tulips, this thing with the tulips was an engagement, as it were, with them, but also I saw it, I experienced it, I didn't fall into it. When that experience was over, I sat back again. And then I was just back in the world that I was normally in. And for the first time I understood that you could have those, you know, and I had this experience with LSD, for example. Obviously people do all, I mean, an LSD trip is just one thing after another like that.
Yeah,
you
cool.
know, I remember standing in Corby, not a good thing to do. Standing on the street in Corby, admiring an orange which someone had dropped off of their shopping or something, and it was on the pavement. And it was just so beautiful. I put it into one of my novels, one of my worst novels, so nobody's ever read that scene. And there's this orange sitting down on the pavement. And it was just so intensely beautiful. And I just stood there looking at it until one of my more astute friends came and led me away. Very gently, you know. But, you know, this is how we could experience the world all the time. We had no filters. And I've had periods of my life where there were no filters. But then to have that experience as a gift and come out of it just normally, as it were, again, was the first step in being able to think in terms of, this can happen. I can have this feeling about the world. I can have this experience of the world. I can have this direct, intimate relationship with things, and it's not going to blow my mind. It's not going to blow me away. And this is why I believe that religions exist, or philosophies exist that contain the mystic experience and give it a context and a discipline. And everyone I in the 70s when I was a student, everyone I knew was going off and, you know, adopting new paths to spiritual awareness, but nobody adopted any of the morals. What about, you know, why have you got 4 girlfriends if you're deeply into Buddhism, and you're tricking them all and things like that? Or if you couldn't return to the Catholic Church, you had to go to the Greek Orthodox Church, right? Because the Catholic Church was too familiar. So you joined the Greek Orthodox Church, but then you would just, you know, do something really gross. And what about the discipline? So, you know, I'm by the way, no person to speak about discipline, because I spent most of my life living a completely undisciplined, very wasteful life. But that moment, I remember, was the beginning of quite a long period of time of beginning to learn how to be less wasteful of whatever. Grace, that's what's the word I'd use.
I mean, the other thing that really struck me is the story of alcohol for you and for drugs for you.
Yeah.
Another kind of, you trying to break out, do you think, of your life? Is that too simplistic?
I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult one to... I would regret any drug I took, except LSD. LSD did something. And I did think of it when I was a teenager as a kind of sacramental event. But I didn't take LSD the way other people took LSD. You see, I didn't go to a party and take LSD. I used to sit in a little room and I'd put little bowls of fruit out and put flowers and stuff like that, and have music there or whatever, and I'd sit and just take the stuff, and then just sit. I didn't go partying. It seemed like a waste of the sacrament. I mean, cocaine's different, right? And I certainly regret cocaine, which was what really got me into the hospital situation. But with alcohol. But imagine this is just a calculated strategy. You say, the more cocaine I take, the more I can drink, because cocaine does stop you from drinking yourself into oblivion. You can stay awake still longer. So you say, well, okay, I'll just take some more coke because I'm feeling a bit too drunk, and so have some more coke, then drink some more, and then that's a spiral that goes on forever. But I don't regret taking LSD. It was at the time. I wish something else had come along to deliver that message or that experience instead of LSD. Because it does do a lot of harm, obviously, in other ways. But as I say, the alcohol, that's part of the culture. My father, I think part of it was recompense to my father. We used to fight, and then we'd go out to the bar, and we'd play crib for drinks. I was very good at crib. So he liked having me around, because we got a lot of free drinks.
So, what you're saying there about LSD and those experiences really do. One of the themes that always strikes me about your work is this kind of religious sense that I feel in your work. I mean, partly there's just so many biblical references, when you look at them.
Well, I told you, the only book I had when I was a kid was the Bible.
Right, yeah. It's obviously gone in deep. There's a lot there.
It's beautiful.
In Black Cat Bone, for instance, in a poem, Creaturely, which I think is a kind of key term for you, Creaturely. You say the only gift is knowing we belong to nothing. But that seems to clash with, sometimes you talk about infinite kinship. In Peregrines, you talk, and in All in One Breath, there's this transcendence. There's this palpable sense of God's absence, a palpable religious sense in pretty much everything I've read.
It's interesting you say God's absence, because I don't think of it in those terms. Obviously, if you use, say, Christian imagery, and mine is very Catholic Christian imagery, that brings a lot of baggage with it. But and I didn't calculate this, but it felt worth it. But and also because you can't talk about blues songs without thinking about the Bible. You can't talk about Imagine reading Moby Dick and not having read the Bible. Imagine what would it make? Would it make any sense to you at all? You couldn't. I find that really weird. I talk to my students and I say, "Well, we all know this reference, right?" I say, "No." How are we going to get through this? This is page 3. How are you going to understand the ending? So that's there. The biblical stuff brings in God with it. But I never really thought about the absence of God. More of the free space. The space that was freed up by not having thoughts about God at all. That simply, why do we need this creature? Or why do we need this nonsense word that people use? And I mean, when I started reading Taoist texts, and I really came home, and it seemed to me the beginning of the Tao Te Ching is saying exactly what I feel about that, which is the Tao that can, the Tao that can, there's lots of translations, the Tao that can be named, the Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao. If you can talk about it, it ain't it. And people realize that the Tao is just another, it can be, in ordinary language it's used in 100 different ways in Chinese, but I only say God, but I mean, oh God, it comes back from my childhood. But if you can talk about God, and even think about God, then you're thinking about a construct that something. Meister Eckhart says, God, his little prayer, Meister Eckhart's prayer, we all know, I suppose, but God, save me from the idea of God. And he's praying to, there's this other idea of the Godhead, and people would relate to, say, Brahman or something like that, the idea of something beyond a human conception of the divine. Because if people say, I get really angry when people say God is love. How could God be love? hasn't got anger or boredom or, rainy afternoons and rainy Tuesday afternoons and caring library. No, it's all of these things, though, if there is, if you want to believe that. But, it's, and people never say God is violence, God is rage, God is anger. They all say, I think I summed up the 70s for myself when I went to Lincoln the festival. And I was hitchhiking along the road, and I got left somewhere, and I walked along the road, and there was this very, very tall American guy, about 6'4" or 5", with hair streaming down like this. This is relatively early for the really long hair thing. And he was wearing beautifully coloured clothes and stuff. And he saw me walking, and I was wearing a yellow t-shirt, white trousers, and I think I was maybe barefoot, with my shoes over my... Anyway, he saw me, and he said, "Peace, greetings and felicitations, man." And I said, "Yeah, around here we just say hi." And we stood down at the side of the road trying to get to this Lincoln. Because two of us had made the same mistake, thinking that Lincoln Pop Music Festival was in Lincoln. It was almost nowhere near Lincoln. So we'd gone the wrong direction both. And probably equally high, I suppose. But and then we stood, and we looked at it, we couldn't speak. We had no common language. We were still looking at each other. And we were wearing similar-ish uniforms. I had short hair, actually. Similar, but there was no common language. Because he wanted to say things to me like, "Hey man, isn't it really kind of like groovy? Like all this beautiful rain, man, this English rain." And I was standing there thinking, I wish I brought my Mac with me. My mum said, "Bring a Mac," and I didn't do it. He was Californian, but rain was attractive to him.
I want to come back to, for the moment, I'm just trying to think what else I'd like to talk to you about, but I want to come back to Stevens again, because he says at some point, a single manner or mood thoroughly matured and exploited is that fresh thing. A single manner or mood thoroughly matured and exploited is that fresh thing. And reading your poems again, it brought that back to mind, that there is a sense with your work that there's a single manner or mood, which is that fresh thing, something that you're wanting to mature, Stephen's great core idea. Is that true, do you think?
We were talking about Stevens before we came in, and I used to. Stevens was my prophet in poetry for a long time. But when I hear you say that again, I think back to Wordsworth actually. I think, is it that much different from Wordsworth's recollection and tranquility, etc.? And I don't think it is really. And I would counter that with something. It's not counter but I would put more emphasis on this from Emily Dickinson. When Emily Dickinson says, "The soul must be a door ajar." And instead of going out like Wordsworth with your butterfly nerve experience and getting the really beautiful one and taking it home and thinking about it for 3 days and then writing a poem, I like the idea from Emily Dickinson, which is that if you just leave your soul open, like a door that's been left ajar. She goes on to say that, and obviously God makes an appearance, but it's Emily Dickinson's God who gets a free pass from me anyway. So that, just in case God wants, or the divine wants to visit you, that the door is open. And we were talking yesterday, when I was at Lincoln Arts Club talking yesterday about painting, and I was talking about enunciations. That's my favourite kind of painting, and trying to say, what is an enunciation? And it seems to me that the enunciation will happen to you if your soul is left ajar, like an open door. And every moment that we experience could be an enunciation. And usually we're too busy or too tired, or your son's playing guitar too loud or something to actually, see the angel arriving. But every now and again the angel arrives. It's an orange on the pavement. Or it's someone doing something extraordinary, an act of extraordinary kindness. And when I was in Switzerland, the last journey I made before this one actually, I had some health problems while I was there, and I really didn't know if I was going to get back to the airport, get on the plane. That they'd let me on the plane, if I'd actually get to the airport, and a whole chain of people worked together, completely independently, and without any appeal from me, to make sure that I got from that hotel onto that plane. And when I got off in Edinburgh where there's a car supposed to be waiting, there was no car. And the same thing happened all the way home. Now, that doesn't always happen, sadly. But when that did happen, you think, this is an annunciation. This is an invitation to consider the kindness of people as well as the everyday reminders we have of to consider the trivial, the venial, the cruel. You know, these people just saw somebody in mild trouble or possibly more than mild trouble and just stepped up, as I hope I would do. I mean, but you know, but it was that whole chain that just that one thing happened. One person left off, thought they had me to that point safely, and the next person took up the. And I don't think I would have gotten home. I would have ended up in a Swiss hospital somewhere. And I really wanted to be home. So the people made that happen.
And is poetry like that for you? Is writing and reading poetry the way of keeping the soul door open?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't do anything deliberately, and my wife can tell you many reasons for that. I'm not somebody who can make a plan and execute it. You know, don't get me to do. You know, what's that place called? That Swedish place where you put things together.
IKEA.
Do not ask me to do IKEA. But my wife does all the IKEA in the house, and she loves it. I think she deliberately buys IKEA to rub my nose in it. But I can't do it. But, you know, where were we? We're on track here.
The poems keeping the soul door open.
Yeah. I don't set out to write a poem. I mean, every now and again I get commissioned to write a poem, and I say I will if I can. I don't know if I can or not. It sort of interests me, so I'd like to. But and people are very kind about it usually. They just say, okay, well, we'll hope that'll be okay. Let us know if you're going to bomb out. I originally bombed out from doing one that I really felt important to do about coral reefs in Australia. I usually get those kinds of commissions. But I can't deliberately write. But I go about leaving myself open to things that happen, and then later on, well, that's the nature of most experiences, not just writing poetry. Maybe later on, something happens, and it connects with something else that happened, and etc. I like my best kind of analogy for creativity, if you want to call it that. I hate the use of the word that's currently being used by the creative industries. You know those guys, right? But my best one I've ever heard was John Adams, the American composer, and he says what he does is he goes out into the woods and he lives out in this little hut in the forest for about several months. And then he says, I come back to San Francisco and work like a banker. I'm not sure he's got that right. Maybe bankers in San Francisco are harder working than other places. But he just sits, he sits down at 9 in the morning and works till 6 in the evening. I guess it's a long lunch, I don't know. But, you know, he writes, he just works. Because then he calls that period composting. The part where he was out in the woods is composting. And he says that all of the events that have happened during the previous year or so before he was into the woods, things start coming up again. They come up in new form. They come up in dreams. They come up in visions. And I mean, he doesn't go far into that because it's John Adams after all. He's guarding himself very carefully against misinterpretation. But he's letting an organic process happen within him. But the start of that organic process is this openness. The door is open in the soul, and things come through. And sometimes it's like a swallow flying in. It just flies in through one window and out the other, say. But it's flown through that space. And then later on, often when you're bored, I don't know if other people feel this, do you, Dad? When you start getting really good ideas when you're bored. And of course it's a great Japanese classic about making porcelain, The Unknown Craftsman, by a man called Yanagi. And he says that the way to train young men, I'm afraid, who did this, to train them was to sit them down with a huge lump of clay and just say, make stuff with that. And they start doing stuff that they think are teacups. And then they get bored with doing that. They start experimenting. They start doing different stuff. They go, well, what happened? I did this. And then they start being creative. I think sometimes that happens, you know. So long bus journeys or, you know, those times when I can't get out of the bath because I'm too tired. You know, those kinds of things. That you're lying around or you're sitting around or you're swimming or you're walking in the woods and you let yourself empty and then something starts happening. And it's an organic process. That's why I feel more strongly. And yet I know for sure by talking to other writers that many other writers wouldn't say that at all. They would say, no, I sit down in the library, I do research, I put this together with that, and I'm very controlling and conscious of that. You know. I remember working with an artist called Callum Innes. And I started doing all this John Cagey stuff with him. Because we're having the first meeting when you're working in a collaboration with someone, you're sort of sounding each other out and getting to know each other. And Callum Innes said, his work is, he paints fields of colour and paints over them, and he starts removing the paint. And it shows things that come out of the process of painting several layers and then taking it off. And I started to try and engage with him. I started talking about, John Cagey stuff about chance and grace and all of these things and the contemplative state that you can maybe get into before you start doing this. And he's looking at me like, you crazy? You know how much all this stuff costs? This canvas is expensive. I have control every aspect of what happens. I said, well, what happens if you don't control it? You have to throw the thing away. And his studio, out back of his studio, there's all these, canvases just tossed out because by that time, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. But he felt that what was important, what the art making was about, was the control part of it. And of course there is that. I personally feel that for me, for poetry, maybe in particular, and it's true I think of music, is that you consolidate something in yourself so that you never think about form again, that the form happens straight out of the process of, it's hard to talk about without sounding mystical, but the organic process of composition, form emerges at the same time as anything else that's happening. There's that famous story about Hokusai. Someone said to Hokusai, how do you draw bamboo like that? And he said, well, you look at bamboo for 70 years. And then you just go out and work spontaneously. Because spontaneity, as jazz musicians will tell you, spontaneity means a lot of preparation. And the best jazz musicians, they've been listening to all these standards. You hear Miles Davis pick up on something like Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time. I cry every time I hear the Munich version of that. Every time I hear it. And I think, this man knows everything about music, inside out and backwards. And he takes this innocent little song and he breaks your heart with it. And he does almost nothing. It's just extraordinary. And that was one night he did it that way. And then the next time they were in Denmark or wherever, and they did it a different way. I got a friend who's got about 8 of those live recordings, bootlegs mostly. And you hear the different ones, and each night he broke your heart differently, in a significantly different way.
And do you want to do that in your poems, to break your heart differently?
Yeah, I want to break everybody's heart.
That's a great place to finish. Thank you very much, John Burnside.